All right. Well, hello, and thank you for attending today's session, all part of the Modern Sales Pros Disco Duets, Harmonizing Sales and Marketing. So I am John Miller. I am currently the Chief Evangelist at Demandbase. Recently stepped down from my full-time role as CMO as I'm starting to think about my next startup. But I bring lots of experience in marketing and sales go-to-market as a marketing entrepreneur. First as one of the original founders and the first CMO at Marketo, then as the CEO founder of Engagio, and then again most recently at CMO of Demandbase. And I'm joined by an esteemed panel of fellow go-to-market experts who I will let introduce themselves before we get into some awesome Q&A. Let's just go in the order of the slide, please. So Manoj, if you don't mind going first.
Hi, everybody. My name is Manoj Shamnani. I'm the founder and CEO of Sales Intel. At Sales Intel, we provide data and intelligence solutions for go-to-market teams to go build the pipeline.
Nice and sweet. Ting Ting?
Great, thank you. My name is Ting Ting Luo, and I'm the VP of Marketing at Orem. Orem is a live conversation platform that helps sales teams build their calling culture and get connected to prospects over the phone in the fastest way through our virtual sales floor and dialer products. And as a former product marketer, this topic is very dear to me. I'm really excited to get into it with the rest of the panel today.
And Paul.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I'm Paul Ross. I'm CMO at Affinity. Affinity, we are a relationship intelligence platform where we essentially help investors and enterprise sellers to get more deals through their networks and their relationships.
All right. Nice and sweet. So let's get into the discussion. I mean, one of the things that I've kind of always liked to sort of say when bringing up the sales and marketing alignment is I say sales is from Mars, marketing's from Venus. You know, we are two different groups that have to find a way to work together, and yet we think about the world in fundamentally different ways. Marketing's thinking about long-term and strategy and development, and sales tends to be thinking about, rightly so, what's going on right now and what needs to happen immediately. So we have these two different teams that use different language, often have different metrics, different training, different backgrounds. And yet we need to somehow find a way to come together. And that's really kind of what we're focusing on today. Lots of areas we'll discuss. We're going to cover sales development. We're going to discuss, literally just getting sales and marketing to communicate better, metrics, and so on. But let's start with sales development, as kind of a key area to discuss. Sales development in many ways is the bridge that sits between sales and marketing. And I think in many ways, as a result, there's a lot of debate about where they should report. So I certainly have my point of view. I recently ran a poll actually on LinkedIn, and it was amazingly how kind of split this was. 36% said it should report to marketing. 35% said it should report to sales. I did have an option to split it, which was, 17% said, well, let's have inbound report to marketing and outbound report to sales. And then only 12% answered with, it depends. And I'll give you a sneak peek. That's actually my answer. But before I get into the details of exactly why I think that, let's hear from our panel. Starting with Ting Ting. Where does sales development sit for you, and how does that support your goals?
Yeah, John, thank you so much for sharing that data. Very interestingly, that's very similar to what we see at Orem. So some of you might not know, Orem's customers tend to be sales development teams. And for us, it's a pretty even split, whether or not they report into sales versus marketing. For us at Orem, our sales development team reports into sales, and that's largely cultural. So, our sales development team isn't just the internal power users of the company. They're also the talent bench for the company. So many of them have career aspirations to become closing reps. So for us, it makes a lot of sense to group them into the sales broader umbrella. And what that means for the marketing team, it does put more onus on us to stay close to that org, build processes and automation to make sure that we are staying connected through that bridge, as you said.
Okay. So your main reasoning for putting it under sales is because of the talent bench.
Talent bench, it's cultural. It's also where that team wants to be.
Okay. Cool. All right. And then Manoj, what about for you guys?
Yeah, for Sales Intel, as it stands today, our BDR team, both inbound and outbound, sits under our CRO, that works well. But this is my fourth company. I've tried all the combinations of this. We had BDR team sits in the marketing. We split, inbound under marketing and outbound under our VP of sales. And there's no right answer, right? There's no right answer, or there's no wrong answer. I think it depends. And this is, let me just unpack my version of it depends. For me, the BDRs are the aspiring, AEs. 70% of BDRs, you ask them, who do you want to be? They'll say, I want to be an AE. And remaining 30%, they want to be either BDR leaders, or they want to go to, do something in marketing, or they want to go into customer support, right? So then you take a step back and look at who is the right person to give them that career path, right? 70% of your population is telling you that I want to be an AE. So, it makes sense to put them into the sales organization. So that's one part of my it depends. Second part of my depends is developing the talent from BDRs to AE or CS or marketing. It's a DNA, right? It's something that you have it or don't. So if your CMO has that DNA, it comes from that background where they have managed it and they're passionate about developing the talent, you put that in the CMO organization. But if your CRO or the VP of sales has that passion and that experience and the DNA, then you put them under sales. I think the focus should be on the BDR first. If you focus on the BDR team, the business will take care of itself.
Paul, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I'd like your point around depends. I actually think it's maybe because I'm mean. It's less about their career development and it's more about what the kind of motion for go-to-market is. Quick story on this. I used to own BDR at Affinity until very recently, and they basically took it away from me, potentially because I was dorking it up so badly. But really what it was is because we have a model where we are driving a kind of marketing qualified account approach to outbound using intent data. And so therefore tying the BDR with the sales person to enable that to work effectively, because we're in a very named account model, was the best match for our go-to-market motion. So that was really why we put it there. Maybe a little bit because I wasn't that great at managing them, but that was the real driver versus the kind of career aspiration. It was really driven by the ownership of that motion and making it tied really tightly there.
I'm curious what you all think. I mean, as I've talked to people about this and looked at my recent online poll, the strongest argument for why people have it in sales is what we've discussed, right? It's like they want to be salespeople, and these are the future salespeople, and they should be in sales. The strongest argument for it being in marketing is usually some version of, marketing and sales development both are focused on creating opportunities, whereas sales is focused on closing opportunities. So, at the end of the month, put the people who have the same job together, and then, you also, and it makes it a lot harder for marketing to, frankly, own the pipeline number, when they don't own kind of the key aspect, of pipeline.
I think I agree with that, John. I think that's where that motion thing is important. It's like for us, we're a heavy inbound business. 75% of our business comes inbound through marketing. And we're building that outbound motion and heavy intent-based kind of outbound. And so tying those two people together. So it's kind of like, that's where my depend thing is. If we were in a different situation, I think I would definitely agree with you in terms of or that proposition of the pipeline ownership being in marketing.
Yeah. Yeah. Topo did some research on this. Topo is now part of Gartner, and they found is that top performing teams do perform about the same regardless of where they report. So I think that just proves like is ultimately doesn't matter. And I think more than anything else, you put it where there's a leader, and I think you were saying this. You put it where there's a leader who wants to own it and is going to do a good job owning it.
Yep.
And it's kind of just frankly, and that's why it moves around. And like many things in the world, there's advantages to being in marketing, and then there's pains. So you have it in marketing, and then it's great. You have those advantages, and then after a while, those pains build up. So then you switch it, and it feels great because all those pains went away. And then it sits in sales for a while, and then eventually the pains of it sitting in sales build up, and you switch it back. And there's nothing wrong with that. So, so let's talk a little bit more about just other kinds of like orchestration, and kind of getting these teams together. We didn't really prep for this, but one of you mentioned that they report to your CRO. So CRO is an interesting title because for some people, the chief revenue officer owns all of revenue, and marketing and customer success and all those functions roll up to a CRO. And in other organizations, CRO is really a fancy name for the head of sales. I'm curious, like, what does CRO mean to you at your organization?
So I can go first. So go ahead, Paul.
All right, I'll go then. So like for us, it's essentially all of the revenue, not the pipeline. So it's sales and CS, so renewal, customer success, all new business, all upsell is where Dustin, our CRO, owns. And I have to say that we have a great relationship in that model, whereby I'm providing him new business pipe as well as supporting kind of upsell and other kind of sources of revenue. But that's really where it sits is like, because I agree with you, like all three models make complete sense in some circumstances, where it's the Uber sales leader role, the sales and CS, or all of it. It really depends on the circumstance. I would say from a marketing leader's perspective, not being part of underneath the CRO is my ideal. Is not to be that part of it, but I know that there's some very successful CMOs who do sit in there, but they're typically more senior VPs versus the kind of CMO role.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to be a C-level executive,
Correct.
If you're not reporting to the CEO.
Great.
And oftentimes CROs, they come from their sales background and may not kind of be the right people to appreciate. You get the alignment and the coordination. You lose, I think, a lot of the nuance of marketing.
Yeah.
Nose, you're a CEO. Did you want to jump on this one?
Yeah. So I think it depends upon the stage of the company. When you are, 0 to call it 5, 7, 8 million, say under $10 million, it makes sense to have one leader. And in that case, if you're senior enough of a CRO, you do a fine job managing marketing and sales. But once you get to, $10+ million and scaling, I think the importance of having a CMO who's well-rounded, who's not just looking at the CMO responsibility from the demand gen lens, but also looking at from the brand building lens. Because after that becomes a huge thing, and can have a seat at the table becomes paramount to the success of the company. Right? Therefore, I think as you look at the stage of the company, it's growing past $10 million. You need CMO and CRO. Close alignment, very close alignment, and that's where the CEO's job becomes important to make sure that the teams are aligned with not only the CRO and the CMO, but your chief product officer, right? Because these three legs of your stool, of your go-to-market stool, they have to be aligned to be successful.
Yep. Ding, did you have anything to add to that?
That makes a lot of sense. Right now, we're a small company, so we don't have a CRO, but I know that alignment is something we discuss a lot, and I'm very happy to learn some insights from you.
I was talking to one marketing leader recently whose company is thinking about experimenting with breaking marketing apart and putting kind of pipeline demand generation under the CRO, but having kind of brand and product marketing and positioning and things like that as kind of a true marketing expertise. I don't know. I'm not sure I want that job as a CMO, but from a strategic perspective, again, I think it's a model that could work.
Yeah, John, I might actually know the company you're referring to. The CMO, I know a CMO who's kind of going through the same set of conversations, if it's not the same. And I think there it's like you're betting on in that model, you're betting on the specific people in those roles to be very successful. It kind of goes back to more of a old school corporate marketing versus kind of field marketing almost split. So I think, but it really comes down to the person that's going to be in that role.
The other thing I'll just again, didn't prep you guys on this one, but just staying on this theme of like org structures is marketing ops versus sales ops versus rev ops. At Demandbase, we just pulled the Band-Aid to kind of smash marketing ops and sales ops together into a rev ops function. Part of the challenge is, as a CMO, I was never going to let rev ops report to the head of sales because then it's just glorified sales ops. So we finally made the decision that rev ops reported to the CFO, but as a true kind of independent function. So curious kind of how your organizations have tackled marketing ops, sales ops, rev ops, and where it rolls up. Ting Ting, you're nodding, so do you want to go?
Yeah, I can start. So we have a rev ops organization that actually sits with IT and compliance right now. And that rev ops org has spokes coming out of that with different go-to-market counterparts. So marketing ops, sales ops, as well as like a couple of folks covering systems, and that ensures some neutrality in the relationship. And I think like I mentioned, we rely on that team a lot for data insights, automation, and honestly, a source of truth for Colin and I to have the conversations that we need to have without getting into, kind of mix of data as narrative. So for us, that works well for now. I know that, one of the challenges we had as well was it puts a lot of pressure on that team, though. To communicate a lot, make sure that projects are beaming cross-functionally through sales, marketing, and also CS. So that's how we've figured out how to make that work for now.
Yep.
And I'm sure it'll change as we grow.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Ours is we have a centralized RevOps team
reporting to
CRO.
Okay.
Yeah,
I know, but okay.
I know. So I'm like torn on this one because I 100% trust the CRO and I 100% trust the VP who owns the RevOps function. They also own our kind of data and analytics team for us as well as sales enablement. So I kind of, in this particular situation, I was okay with it, but I have to be honest, I wouldn't be, especially until I get much bigger, would I be comfortable with doing it again? Mm-hmm. Even in this context, there is some downsides to it in terms of prioritization. Like the things that you were kind of outlining as a fear, John, come to fruition. So it's
and again, a thing I worry about is I would say most of the times I've seen a RevOps leader, that person's come from the sales, even if it's reporting to a neutral org, that RevOps leader comes from the sales ops side. And why is there an inherent assumption that makes more sense than it coming from the marketing ops side?
Yeah. And I think it becomes the Salesforce is the thing. And that's why those people get the thing is get that role. Yeah. I think that's where the background is, which makes sense to an extent. But in terms of like actually operationally supporting the business, I would agree with you. That's pretty questionable.
Okay. So we move on?
Yeah. So in our organization, we have revenue operations reported to our COO or Chief Operating Officer. Yeah. And again, everything that is operations reports into our COO, business operations, HR, finance, and revenue operations. It keeps it neutral, and he's just a great analytical guy, right? Yeah. So sales, marketing, we have sales ops, marketing ops. They report to a VP of revenue operations, and then he reports into our COO.
Yeah, when you have a COO like that, I think that makes a lot of sense. In many cases, that COO is what we said the CRO is earlier, but actually running the whole thing. One model I found interesting was Workato. Their COO reports to the CEO, but is not a broad COO like you said. It really is just the chief operations officer. So it is just the person who runs RevOps, but it's for them, it's a C-level function. I thought that was interesting. So let's move on. And this is starting to get into like, okay, how do marketing and sales teams work together and communicate? I just wanted to introduce it with an analogy I like using, which is that I would say back in my Marketo days, the way marketing and sales worked together resembled a relay race. Marketing would generate a lead and they would pass it like a baton to an SDR who would pass it to sales, who would pass it to customer success. And I'm finding increasingly that model is not working because buying isn't linear. And instead, a better model to me is a U.S. soccer or a football team where we have people in different positions, and we're passing the ball back and forth as the ball moves up and down the field. The path the ball takes towards the goal is very nonlinear. And yet we actually still have very defined roles and responsibilities depending on our role and where the ball is on the field. So I actually like that analogy a lot to kind of, set things up. So, you're welcome to comment on that. But I think maybe just using that as a framework, the question might start with be like, so what does this mean in the modern sales and marketing ways of working together for what you think sales needs and wants from marketing? And vice versa, what does marketing want and need from sales? Just like the players on the field, what do they want and need from each other? So, Paul, do you mind taking that one?
Yeah, I think your analogy is really solid because the reality of, if you're not talking about, pure hand raiser, I'm ready to buy, I want to do this now, everything else that we're doing in go-to-market is tied to the rest of the population of potential buyers who are not in that situation. And so there's so much work that we're doing in terms of account-based marketing orchestration, flowing information into the different parts of the organization about what the readiness for a potential prospect to buy and using the data. So I think it's absolutely what you're describing is that there's no longer that linear approach. And I think one of the things that would be at the industry level for the kind of sales in general to grasp is how much orchestration and effort's going into that now. That we're not just passing off the person who's ready to buy, as we were maybe, we were in the luxurious situation of doing that mostly in the last couple of years, I think. But now we're much more working on nurturing these people, and therefore there's a lot more movement back and forth. And I think having sales teams understand that much more effectively, and therefore not have to basically treat everything like it's a hot lead and ready to go, that takes a different type of approach from a sales team's perspective.
Yeah.
I think on the marketing side, we've tried to get there, and I think we need to learn a lot more about that as well, so that we're not, simplifying things down to the MQL model. We score it and we give it to you. That's also not work. So I think there's a lot of work to do on both sides of that to educate it that reality that you're describing is very much the case.
Yeah. So to simplify, in this new model, it's just the interface needs to be more complex than just here are the MQLs.
Correct.
Manoj, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah. So I like your analogy of a soccer. I think there's still a little bit of a relay between the BDR, the AEs, and to CS, right? Because those responsibilities are almost well defined with some level of borders, as long as the transitions are smooth. But I think the marketing, they stay engaged throughout the journey, right? They generate the awareness and bring a prospect in the pipeline. They stay as the AE, the BDR is setting up the appointment, and the AE is going through the process. 12, 13, 15 people are getting involved in the decision-making process. So marketing's job is to make sure the brand stays top of mind and the journey that a buyer is taking is smoother, right, and is guided. And then when it goes to CS, ensure that marketing continues to stay top of mind, right, to reduce the churn and increase the expansion. So my take is a little bit of a relay still exists in the BDR to AE to CS, but marketing's role is much more broad.
Yeah, that's fair. I think, to Paul's point, some of that does depend on the go-to-market strategy. Like if you're doing an ABM motion, like larger, complex, more complex sales, I would say you still would even want the AEs and the SDRs collaborating together in the prospecting phase. Because that, like the AE will go after the VPs and the SDR goes after the directors. I mean, I've seen motions like that. So
yeah,
I think
the
the theme
I
of
would
today
also add into that is I think Manoj is right overall, but again, depending on the go-to-market motion, like when you're starting to think about, really looking at your business like through the lens of like a bow tie model, where you're seeing what's happening after the sale and how much kind of focus is on driving revenue, upsell, renewal, whatever those things. I think that becomes more complex, more similar to the kind of early stage, and less of that kind of handing off one to the other and then kind of not paying attention to it. But yeah, it's a fair point, Manoj, in terms of the certainly the new business model.
Yep.
Yeah, in transitional and smaller budget size, under $50,000 deal, you still see some semblance of the assembly line, right?
Absolutely.
At the AECS level. The larger deals where you have enterprise, then obviously you have a little more collaboration. So I agree with you on that, John.
Ting, anything you want to add to sort of what marketing needs from sales and what sales needs from marketing?
Yeah, I want to add a bit from the messaging side as well. We recently completed a rebrand about half a year ago, which was a really big exercise. I think a lot about the feedback loop from of market insights coming from sales team, whether it's data in Salesforce, anecdotal conversations, or even introductions to customers that we can talk to that really funnel into a brand strategy or marketing strategy. And at the same time, we rely on our sales team to share consistent messaging, right? So that comes with certain processes and practices around sales enablement. That takes a lot of work as well, especially in a remote environment.
Cool. Okay. Well, let's move on to sort of our last area, which I think might be the meatiest, which is, again, kind of about building bridges across the team. And perhaps one of the most exciting ones is metrics. Yes, I did just say metrics are exciting, but, fair enough. So, it's really, what are the sort of shared metrics that we should be using? So I have some strong points of view on this one also, but I'd love Manoj to kick this one off.
Sure. I think the ultimate metric for sales, marketing, the organization is revenue, right? That's the ultimate metric. And then from there, you start, deriving the metrics that all lead up to your revenue numbers. But before I go to the revenue metrics here, I think once you get the alignment with sales, marketing, product, we call it go-to-market teams. The biggest metric to me is your ICP definition, right? Many times you see sales and marketing, they say that they are aligned, yet their alignment on the definition of their ICP is just not clear, right? So once you get that alignment on that ICP, things start to get much easier. So in my mind, the ultimate metric is revenue. From there, it's sales qualified pipeline, and then from there is marketing qualified pipeline, and from there is the leads that you're generating, the brand effectiveness. So that's how I see as the metric. But the underlying theme before even any metric is get the alignment on your ICP. And ICP changes, right? At the stage of the company, different quarters, different products, ICP changes. So getting alignment on the ICP to me is the biggest metric of all.
Okay. Paul?
So I think if you look at this as an alignment exercise between sales and marketing, and then further on, so we have this very specific thing that I actually was very resistant to initially, which was we actually have a spreadsheet that the revenue leaders get together and review every Monday at a specific time, and it's not automated into a dashboard. It's not automated because what we force people to do is we force people to enter the numbers into this tracking spreadsheet, and then as a team we review them. So if there's a crappy number in there, you own that. You're putting it in. So we have like our monthly ARR numbers, we have open pipeline, we have pipe creation, and our kind of expansion numbers and a number of kind of key metrics below that. But the key thing is that that's one spreadsheet that we share and that we look at every single week, and we're taking action and basis of where we're, things are not going well, taking action, moving things forward. And we're doing that collectively rather than marketing having a separate discussion, bringing numbers of like, hey, your guys aren't following up on these things. Like our VP of sales owns the conversion rate on our marketing qualified accounts. He owns that number there, not marketing. He owns the conversion rate on our hand raisers. Yep. So we own the pipeline number, whereas he owns those conversion rates. So we're making it's very clear that alignment takes place and that we own the numbers themselves.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I've got thoughts on this one that at times are a little controversial. Because as soon as I start hearing we own pipeline, they own this, for me, I'm like, that starts to break down the sort of very team-based nature of like the soccer team I was just talking about. Yeah. And like I start imagining a soccer team that has two different scoreboards, one for the goals scored by the forwards and one by the goals scored by the fullbacks, and so, I don't know the answer here, because on the one hand, I think the right thing for alignment is to throw out the idea of marketing sourced pipeline, sales sourced pipeline, because you just get into battles over like who really created that or not, and instead just focus on total team sourced pipeline. I get, and I believe that's passionately true, and at the same time, that makes it so much harder for marketing to defend its budget.
Well, just to be clear, I actually agree with you, and actually that's the model we have. Yeah. Is that like it's more that we collectively own each of those high level parts, and then we're discussing so Michelle, my head of demand gen, she's discussing the entirety of the pipe, not just her pipe, as it were, for marketing. So there is kind of that joint ownership.
So it's the ownership of kind of who talks about it.
Yes. Yeah. And who writes it in. And so she's talking about those things.
Okay. Yeah. Because you sort of said they own the conversion on the marketing qualified accounts. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, but who owns the quality of the marketing qualified accounts?
Yeah.
That affects the conversion rate.
But that's where you're like, if Jeff is saying, hey, our conversion rate is going down, and this goes back to maybe the next topic around feedback and engagement, we're having that discussion there versus having it trying to get an understanding from a rep or other things. So I think what's powerful about this is the ownership is the ownership of the data and the discussion, not necessarily just the outcome.
I think that's a really key point.
Yeah, and we're talking about our marketing budget based on being driven by hand raisers and awareness, and so we have the ability to measure those things. But yeah, it's really about the getting to that next level of granularity after that and using that as the conversation point.
Yep. One of the things that's related to this is who sets the goal for the pipeline number, right? In terms of are we creating enough? And is that done? I assume with all of you having RevOps organizations that number comes out of RevOps.
We have a strategy model.
Yeah. And then do you have, do the goals, how far up do the goals waterfall, right? So, okay, there's a pipeline number, but then does that imply an MQA or an MQL number? Does that imply a campaign response number? And is that, are you all tracking metrics kind of that go up the funnels, that kind of reverse waterfall up the funnel?
A lot of it is,
definitely.
A lot of it is you have previous years of data, right? The conversion data.
Yeah.
And based off of that, at least in our planning, we do a top down and bottoms up model, and figure out the capacity that the team has, right, to close the business, right, and the capacity of your sales team to close the business is directly related to the pipeline that you're generating. And so if you generated, $50 million of pipeline and your conversion ratio is 20%, all of a sudden you're not going to generate $100 million of pipeline in the same budget, right? So once something has to change organically, your brand has improved. So maybe 10% more with the same budget. You can assume it's going to change, but not more than that.
That was a very CEO statement there, Manoj. It was like, yeah, you're going to get 10% more out of the same budget in all cases. That's awesome. But I think one of the interesting things you just said was like the data driving the model, obviously your historical model. I think this is where it's been very interesting being a marketing leader across the whole of SaaS and software recently, is because all of your data suddenly was useless over the last year and a half compared with what it was, because things dramatically changed. Same thing on outbound. You can say the same thing on the sales side. So I think that was one of the interesting things over the last year is that, to your point, like all the models, like if you were lucky, they stayed the same. But if you were a lot of companies, they didn't stay the same. And it's like how you adapt to that, how you adapt your modeling to meet that. And then having those conversations about, okay, marketing, you're not delivering on these things without the market context.
Yep.
Yeah. I would say actually the pendulum swung, the other side. In 2021, 22, all the SaaS companies, there was so much of frothiness, right? That we all got giddy and we thought that is the new normal. But ask John, who was a veteran and been there in the SaaS for longer than us. That used to be the normal, right? What we are seeing right now, right, used to be the normal back in the days. And then last 2021, 22, if you take those out, this where we are is more or less the normal.
So let's just wrap this one up. Ting. We're really. I think that to me the takeaway on this whole discussion really is just like it works when marketing and sales are communicating. So anything else you would add, Ting, in terms of how we get marketing and sales to share feedback, communicate, just work together more closely?
Yeah, I think oftentimes we see alignment at the top at the leadership teams, or at least after an offsite or after weekly meetings, right? But that doesn't always flow through to the remainder of the organization. So one of the exercises I like to do with my team, at least annually, but sometimes even more frequently, is a bit of expectations mapping between our teams for each person's role in who they're aligned to, who they work with, because that elucidates for each person who's contributing to revenue at the company, how they can help bring alignment. It's not just something that happens at the top, it's something that happens at every level of the company. So that's a tactical point that I would make for how to improve that relationship.
Okay. All right, we're going to wrap with the power round. First of any one thing that you recommend companies do immediately starting tomorrow to improve alignment between marketing and sales. And then I'll ask you each for kind of your key takeaways for the session. So Ting, do you mind starting with one thing that will improve alignment starting tomorrow?
Yeah, I think it's what I just said, which is the expectation mapping across the teams, not just at the top.
Okay.
Yeah.
Paul?
Yeah, for me, consistent with what I was talking about earlier, which is shared data and shared inspection, and that not being done outside of those discussions, and really having very clear data that's singular, not multiple sets of data is the key for it.
Which having RevOps can help with.
Yeah, exactly.
Manoj, we didn't sort of say this one beforehand, but do you have a kind of a one key takeaway
from this session?
Oh, sorry. Before we get to takeaways, one key action people should implement immediately.
I think have a joint go-to-market meeting where you have regular weekly product leader, revenue leader, marketing leader are there, and an independent party, and that is whether it's your COO or CFO or whoever owns the RevOps. So have those. You'll see the benefits of that.
Yep. All right. Cool. My one tip is a little bit more or tactical, but it's to implement something that I call an account stand-up. And this is a bi-weekly meeting between a sales rep, an SDR that supports that sales rep, and then somebody from the marketing team. And every 2 weeks, 15 minutes, and the goal is let's talk about what's happening in that rep's territory. If they've got named target accounts or ABM accounts, what's happening at their named accounts, and then what are we as a team going to do to achieve our goals at that account. There's no managers. It's not a forecast call. It's just like, hey, we want to get into that account. I noticed they have a new executive. what are we going to do? So these stand-ups I found to be incredibly powerful to kind of just get some good dialogues going. So now we'll wrap up with kind of key takeaways from the session. You said you had one, Manoj, so maybe I'll start with you.
No, I loved the discussion here. So thank you for lively discussion. Loved your model, John, where you mentioned it's no longer the relay and it's more of a soccer field. I just have to noodle on that a little bit more and see how do we bring it to world where you're more of a transactional sales and not the ATM. But that was a good
point. Paul?
I think key takeaway for me is actually that model you described and all of the things that the rest of the three of us were kind of discussing in terms of operationalizing aspects of that is actually pretty complicated. There's a lot of complexity that we have to kind of deal with there, and we were highlighting some questions that are kind of painful to address in dealing with that. Like the BDR discussion is a perfect example of that. In that much more fluid, much more dynamic kind of non-linear environment, how do you apply your resources and how do you get them to work collectively is a big deal. Is a lot of work for all of us.
Good one. Yep. Ting Ting.
Yeah, I really like the idea of anything many here have talked about, that there is, accountability, but also joint inspection. I think when things are changing like the market is right now, it takes some time to figure out what's actually happening and how to, shift your resources or shift processes accordingly. So creating that environment where it is a team culture, but also that inspection was also blameless. I think that creates a really good partnership between sales and marketing. So that's one of my takeaways.
Yeah, that was definitely one of mine also. But where I would wrap is, I think if there's any theme of our discussion today, it comes down to one word, which is it depends. I guess that's two words, but I mean, honestly, there's so many debates about where do sales, where do SDRs report? Should I have, where does SDR RevOps report? Should I have a CRO or, should I have MQAs and MQLs? And I think what we've heard in every single case is it depends, right? It depends on what is your go-to-market? Who are the people you have on the team? What are your ASPs? And so on. And so hopefully that can be advice for everybody to just take any sort of religion out of these debates, right? There probably is no one answer, that's always going to be right. And the right answer probably is always that it depends. So that'd be my takeaway from today. Any last words?
Thank you.
All right. Well, listen, so yeah, thank you to the panel, Manoj, Paul, and Ting Ting. We learned from each other. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's session. And last but not least, we look forward to seeing everyone in the next session. So take care.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.